Of issues that we're expecting to hear from the president tonight, Valerie. The South China Morning Post, for instance, suggesting that these two countries could come together on the issue of artificial intelligence, that they may, in fact, be announcing some sort of pledge to limit the use of AI in military applications, things like drones and nuclear missile control systems. That's one thing that could come out of this. Another big issue here, and it's not entirely inappropriate that they are in San Francisco, a place plagued by this problem, is fentanyl. The vast majority of the precursor chemicals that go into manufacturing fentanyl come from China. We'll be very interested to see whether or not some sort of negotiation or at least symbolic pledge comes out of that might clamp down on the trafficking of that terrible drug, which so much of the time does originate from China. And of course, Taiwan, an enormous amount of political pressure on both sides when it comes to Taiwan. Just in the last few minutes after the behind the closed doors session ended, we heard at least one Chinese spokesperson talk about Taiwan being the number one issue for these negotiations. That certainly seems to be the perspective of the Chinese camp, and saying that it is undeniable that they will eventually take China. He urged in this tweet posted on what is now X that the United States should seek to not arm Taiwan or seek to in any way make it independent. So that will be another big issue here. And of course, Valerie, the United States and China are the number one and number two greatest emitters of carbon. They are the single greatest contributors to climate change. And so any effort that those two countries can make to try to clamp down on those emissions could have a world-changing and frankly world-saving effect here. There's also the broad political opportunity to sit down across from Xi Jinping and urge him, as President Biden is presumably going to do, to use leverage in the region to, for one thing, clamp down on North Korea's possible sales of weapons to Russia in the Russian war on Ukraine. That could be a big factor. And also President Biden expected to ask President Xi Jinping to use his leverage on Iran to perhaps convince that nation to not use its proxies against Israel or American facilities across the Middle East. There's really just no end to the number of things that these two leaders could talk about together. And of course, this is a largely symbolic meeting. It is very unusual for a meeting like this to actually wind up with signatures on a piece of paper or anything more than a handshake and a photo op. But just the idea, Valerie, you have to cast your mind back to the beginning of this year, right, when that spy balloon was shot down over just on the waters off of South Carolina. There wasn't even anybody for the U.S. to call in Beijing. That's just how closed off that country has been from the United States when it comes to even, logistical communications between the military arms of each country. Just that was impossible. And so the idea that these two countries are now sitting down, shaking hands, and presumably talking through a wide range of big world-impacting issues is hopefully a sign that they can cooperate in some way in the future, Valerie.
And Jake, there were so many high-level discussions during this meeting. What else was the U.S. hoping to get out of this face-to-face meeting? I know you covered a lot there, but what else were they hoping to get?
I think there are so many issues that they could conceivably try to get out of them. I think it's really an important thing to just keep in mind. Everybody, I think, on in the Biden administration has been careful to speak to the press corps about trying to manage expectations here. All of us are eager to hear what, arguably these two, probably the two most powerful world leaders, of our era coming together could achieve. But, this is a largely symbolic meeting. That said, it makes an enormous difference, for instance, to China to try to project a sense of strength to the people back home, right? Xi Jinping faces a rising youth unemployment picture and a arguably decaying Chinese economy. And so he'll be really seeking to try to project some strength here. And that gives President Biden some leverage. And so presumably he will be able to press on all of these issues, from climate change to these sorts of talks with, connected to Ukraine Ukraine and Israel. You see there John Kerry sitting down, the climate envoy for the United States, supposedly able to meet with his Chinese counterpart. I mean, there is a lot these two countries could get done if they can get together in the room, in the way that we think. But again, we do not expect there will be actual pen to paper today, but we do expect that at least some opening of communications may be happening. That's certainly what the Biden administration is hoping for, Valerie.
And Jake, what about China? Did President Xi get any commitments from President Biden in these discussions?
I have no doubt that projecting strength to the Chinese people, especially around something like Taiwan, was a big goal here. That's why, presumably, a foreign ministry spokesperson was so quick to take to X and say that Taiwan was the #1 issue for this. I mean, the projection of strength there is a very, very big one. And so I'm showing that, but the big one tonight, I mean, after this meeting concludes, it may be that literally at this very moment, President Xi is on his way to a meeting of enormously powerful American CEOs, reportedly Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. Those people are all going to be hosting Xi Jinping at a $40,000 a table dinner tonight. That right there is an opportunity for Xi Jinping to be wooed by these people who command the power of a nation state and represent the greatest opportunities of doing business with the West. And so there is tremendous opportunity both politically and in terms of commodities and trade and business for Xi Jinping making this appearance here in the San Francisco Bay Area, Valerie.
Jake, how is this meeting being talked about in China? The press covering this high stakes meeting. What do you know about that side?
It's very interesting, while we wait moment to moment to cover, everything that is posted on social media by a spokesperson and every moment of everything that comes out of this, the Chinese press is much more measured about this. They are covering it, but we're getting it at sort of about a 24-hour delay, and that is presumably because of the very tightly controlled media environment in China. They are, of course, covering it very closely. They think of it as an opportunity for Xi Jinping to project strength in the world. And literally every aspect of something like this is very tightly controlled. Our colleague Janice Mackey-Freyer has been pointing out over and over again that even the flowers in a bouquet means something to the diplomatic corps of China. And so everything has been very closely orchestrated. It is no coincidence, for instance, Valerie, that China is not appearing directly in downtown San Francisco where I'm sitting, because if they did, they might very well pass by the big crowd of Free Tibet and Free Hong Kong protesters that have gathered outside our building here. Instead, they're just next to Stanford University in a very, place that was kept secret until now, and that is no coincidence. So very much a symbolic power, this meeting for Xi Jinping, but leaving nothing to chance in terms of where it was staged, how it took place, and the very measured tone that Xi undoubtedly took throughout his conversations with the president today, Valerie.
Jake, the leaders were joined at the table by a delegation of top administration officials from both countries. Here is a snippet of what we heard while cameras were allowed inside the room. Take a listen.
Mr. President, we know each other for a long time. We haven't always agreed. Actually, it's not a surprise to anyone. But our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication.
For two large countries like China and the United States, turning their back on each other is not an option. It is unrealistic for one side to remodel the other, and conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides.
All right, Jake, let's get you to weigh in. What do you make of that exchange there in that room?
Well, it has always been the signature hallmark of President Biden's diplomatic style that he just believes that looking into the eyes of another leader face to face is his best possible chance to understand that person, understand what that person wants, and hopefully achieve the best possible outcome for the United States. And China coming together and saying, we are not in a position on this planet to turn away from one another as countries, sounds like just sort of the florid diplomatic speak, the kind kind of emptiness that we expect, sometimes from these sorts of meetings. But it means quite a lot. This is not as aggressive a stance as one might have expected from President Xi in his public remarks. It certainly doesn't reflect, the extremely frosty relationship between these two nations that we've seen over the past few years. It really seems to reflect the kind of sentiment that we've seen increasingly in China. I mean, recent surveys inside China show that young people in China have an increasingly warm attitude toward the United States. The sort of adversarial stance that we have always seen between these two nations over the last couple of years perhaps has warmed slightly here, and it certainly creates for President Biden an opportunity to say, look at how my diplomatic style, this face-to-face, eye-to-eye, handshaking style of leadership, puts us as the United States in the best possible position to cooperate and win what we need to and project strength against China. It's really, I think, going to help him, certainly in 2024, say, look at what my style has done for our place on the world stage. And presumably President Xi is going to go home and boast about his effectiveness as well. But very, very different from a time when these two countries really couldn't even communicate through military channels. The fact that they're coming together and saying even those, seemingly sort of cagey words, those are about as warm a set of words as these countries have had for each other in quite some time, Valerie.
And Jake, you touched on it earlier, the discussion of fentanyl. We know that is such a crisis in this country right now. Was there any hope of a specific agreement coming out of these high-level talks today?
Well, we are expecting to hear something around this. I mean, you have to remember, Valerie, that in China, fentanyl is, in fact, a tightly regulated drug. It's considered illegal, and the manufacture of it is supposed to be tightly regulated. But, for a long time, the Drug Enforcement Administration has been identifying China as the #1 source of the precursor chemicals that make fentanyl possible. And so it is certainly within the power of China, in theory, to crack down on that tightly. And that is certainly what we could hope for. But China has not been diplomatically really motivated to cooperate until very recently. One possible step that the Biden administration could take is lifting restrictions on certain Chinese agencies. There are subsidiaries of the security agencies in China, including one that is the Institute of Forensic Sciences, that could, has until now been under restrictions in the United States for its alleged activities against minority groups in China, like the Uyghur Muslims. It could be that China sees then a lifting of restrictions on that institute, which would allow it to, for instance, make use of U.S. exported technology. That could be the kind of diplomatic bargaining chip that has China saying, okay, now it is time for us to cooperate more thoroughly on the fentanyl problem, and perhaps we can do so. But, certainly China and the United States will be working to do this. Now, I will say this does not come without political risk for President Biden. We have many senators saying that no restrictions should be lifted against something like the Institute of Forensic Sciences. And so it may be that it's something of a gamble for him, but perhaps sitting across the table from Xi, looking in his eyes and knowing as he does that China is the source of fentanyl in the world when it comes to especially the stuff that comes here to the United States, maybe he thinks it's the best possible way to win some cooperation and get our arms around that problem once and for all, Valerie.
And Jay, could there be any finger pointing when it comes to that discussion that the demand is coming from the United States?
I think there is undoubtedly inside China, and perhaps even at today's table a few miles south of me, some of that sort of finger pointing. China is a place that brings martial law against issues of drug abuse and drug use. And so, the experimentation here in the United States with policies like harm reduction, I have no doubt are absolutely shocking to the diplomatic corps sitting across the table from President Biden today. Whether or not that figures into this is not really clear. I mean, each one of these issues that we've talked about, whether it's Taiwan, fentanyl, Israel, Iran, each of those are a bargaining chip, a way of exerting leverage when it comes to the relationship between these two enormous superpowers. And so the question is whether or not this one is one that China feels motivated to cooperate on, or whether maybe in some cynical way they consider it something not to really worry about because the terrible affliction in American cities may not be something they consider something they need to solve. And so it's a very complicated, clashing of political values and political priorities when it comes to this issue, even though sitting here, and especially sitting here in San Francisco, it seems so obvious we would want to solve that problem. Perhaps that's not the way the diplomatic corps feels about it. We'll just have to see what they say at the press conference coming out of this, Valerie.
And Jake, on the broader world stage, what about the wars in Ukraine and Israel, and also the U.S. relationship with Iran? How could foreign policy come up in the president's remarks?
Well, the president will undoubtedly have asked Xi Jinping to use his considerable leverage to try to change the balance of power when it comes to at least a couple of these conflicts, right? If you think about Russia's war on Ukraine, Russia's tremendous spending of resources on that conflict, on that invasion, means that they have, in many cases, run out of even the most basic, kinetic weapons. Just ammunition and guns may very well be the kind of thing that they're hurting for. And they have turned to whatever partner they can find to make that happen. And North Korea has been only too happy to oblige in the past. So that gives President Biden an opportunity to say to Xi Jinping, this is a time for you to use your leverage as North Korea's key ally in the region to no longer allow them, to tell them to no longer sell these weaponry to Russia. That could be an enormous source of leverage for President Biden as he tries to shore up NATO's position and could be a way, again, another bargaining chip for President Xi Jinping. Then as far as Iran goes, yeah, there is enormous power there for China to step in, speak to Iran, and get to the heart of the problem there, which is that Iran uses its proxy forces across the Middle East, whether that is Hamas or Hezbollah or any of dozens of other organizations to exert power in that region. So it really is an opportunity for President Biden, who does not necessarily have a direct line of communication with Iran that would give him any sort of leverage. It gives him the kind of leverage through a conversation like this one with President Xi Jinping to say, can you please use your leverage in the Middle East to tell Iran to stop attacking sites in Syria, to stop attacking American facilities? All of that could very well be something he does here. I mean, it is really like he's sitting at the controls of an extremely complicated and I would say very dangerous control panel with all of these buttons available to him in this conversation with Xi Jinping. And so I really just cannot imagine just how complicated it is to navigate the multi-hour conversation he had to. But the fact that he can touch everything from AI to fentanyl to climate change to Iran to Ukraine is really a mark of just how important it is for these two countries to sit down together, Valerie.
Jake, of course, we have an election next year here in the United States. Since there's been concern about foreign interference, what do you know about President Biden asking the Chinese government to respect the upcoming electoral process?
Well, there is undoubtedly that it will be a topic, whether it was raised here or will be raised perhaps at lower levels between senior staffers on each side. But it is a big topic. We know Canada has opened an inquiry into possible foreign interference by the Chinese into their elections. Australia just recently passed new laws that, without naming China, experts tell me are very much squarely aimed at China for possible election interference. And that's not even counting the threat that we've been covering in our reporting in the last few days when it comes to the threat of China using AI to turbocharge propaganda production. It used to be that a country like China required American fluent, both linguistically and culturally fluent actors to create an effective propaganda campaign. Well, in the era of large language models and ChatGPT, that is no longer the case. You don't even have to speak the language to create effective propaganda in this new world that we're all in. And so we are undoubtedly seeing a world in which a country like China, which could, in the past was limited by the number of effective English speakers and writers it had, no longer has to. And research out of places like Microsoft and others have found that generative AI is flooding already, for instance, the airwaves, the social media of Taiwan ahead of their elections in January. Taiwan has a digital minister, Audrey Tang, that we sat down with outside of a UN convention last month. And she said over and over again that she is seeing the threat from China using generative AI, and that she expects that the United States will see that threat as well. Now, it's important to mention here that in reaching out to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the Foreign Ministry says that it does not interfere in other countries' elections or their internal affairs, and that China has signed on to an AI governance strategy that it says is going to help to promote the responsible use of AI. But election interference, which used to be only really something that you could imagine a country with ready access to very, very capable English speakers had access to, it turns out that any country with access to AI may have that power. And certainly China is the one that everyone is going to be worried about going into 2024, Valerie.
Jake, certainly the world is watching this meeting very closely and what the president is about to say here in a few moments. But is Biden setting an example for U.S. allies that it is okay to meet with China?
Well, this is such a fraught issue, right? Because up until now, the position of the United States has truly been that China is that it is a hostile actor. Just recently, you had the President of the United States, President Biden, calling Xi Jinping a dictator, a statement that drew raised eyebrows even from his own committee, his own staff. And so to see him now today, and in remarks before he went to China.
Jake, apologies, we have to interrupt you. President
Yes,
Biden walking up to the podium right now. Let's take a listen.
Have a seat. As you know, I just concluded several hours of meetings with President Xi, and I believe they were some of the most constructive and productive discussions we've had. I've been meeting with President Xi since both of us were vice president over 10 years ago. Our meetings have always been candid and straightforward. We haven't always agreed, but they've been straightforward. And today, build on the groundwork we laid over the past several months of high-level diplomacy between our teams. We've made some important progress, I believe. First, I'm pleased to announce that after many years of being on hold, we are restarting cooperation between the United States and PRC on counter-narcotics. In 2019, you may remember, China took action to greatly reduce the amount of fentanyl shipped directly from China to the United States. But in the years since that time, the challenge has evolved from finished fentanyl to fentanyl chemical ingredients and pill presses, which are being shipped without control. And by the way, some of these pills are being inserted in other drugs like cocaine. A lot of people are dying. More people in the United States between the ages of 18 and 49 die from fentanyl than from guns, car accidents, or any other cause, period. So today, with this new understanding, we're taking action to significantly reduce the flow of precursor chemicals and pill presses from China to the Western Hemisphere. It's going to save lives, and I appreciate President Xi's commitment on this issue. President Xi and I tasked our teams to maintain a policy and law enforcement coordination going forward to make sure it works. I also want to thank the bipartisan congressional delegation to China, led by Leader Schumer, in October for supporting this effort so strongly. Secondly, and this is critically important, we're reassuming military-to-military contacts, direct contacts. As a lot of you press know who follow this, that's been cut off, and it's been very worrisome. That's how accidents happen, misunderstandings. So we're back to direct, open, clear, direct communications on a direct basis. Vital miscalculations on either side can cause real trouble with a country like China or any other major country. And so I think we're made real progress there as well. And thirdly, we're going to get our experts together to discuss risk and safety issues associated with artificial intelligence. As many of you have traveled with me around the world, almost everywhere I go, every major leader wants to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence. These are tangible steps in the right direction to determine what's useful and what's not useful, what's dangerous and what's acceptable. Moreover, there are evidence of cases that I've made all along. The United States will continue to compete vigorously with the PRC, but will manage that competition responsibly so it doesn't veer into conflict or accidental conflict. And where it's possible, where our interests coincide, we're going to work together like we did on fentanyl. That's what the world expects of us. the rest of the world expects, not just in people in China and the United States, but the rest of the world expects that of us. And that's what the United States is going to be doing. Today, President Xi and I also exchanged views on a range of regional and global issues, including Russia's refusal and brutal war to stop the war and brutal war of aggression against Ukraine and conflict in Gaza. And as I always do, I raised areas where the United States has concerns about the PRC's actions, including detained and exit-banned U.S. citizens, human rights, and coercive activities in the South China Sea. We discussed all three of those things. I gave them names of individuals that we think are being held, and hopefully we can get them released as well. No agreement on that. No agreement on that. I also stressed the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. It's clear that we object to Beijing's non-market economic practices and disadvantage American businesses and workers, and that we'll continue to address them. And I named what I thought a number of those were. I welcome the positive steps we've taken today, and it's important for the world to see that we're implementing the approach in the best traditions of American diplomacy. We're talking to our competitors, and the key, and just talking, just being blunt with one another, so there's no misunderstanding, as a key element to maintaining global stability and delivering for the American people. And in the months ahead, we're going to continue to preserve and pursue high-level diplomacy at the PRC in both directions, to keep the lines of communication open, including between President Xi and me. He and I agreed that each one of us could pick up the phone, call directly, and we'd be heard immediately. And that's, now I'd like to be able to take some questions, if I may. And I'm told that Dimitri of the Financial Times has the first question.
Thank you. And as an Irishman, I apologize for bringing the rain.
Well, holy God, I wouldn't have called on you if I'd known that. No, I'm teasing. Go ahead, fire away, Dimitri.
President Biden, given that America is playing a key role in two major global crises, in Ukraine and in Gaza, does that alter your previous commitment to defend Taiwan from any Chinese military action? And did Xi Jinping outline the conditions under which China would attack Taiwan?
Look, I reiterated what I've said since I've become president, what every previous president of late has said, that we maintain the agreement that there is a one China policy, and that I'm not going to change that. That's not going to change. And so that's about the extent to which we discussed it. Next question, sorry, was Bloomberg.
It appears, among other issues, that your agreement with President Xi over fentanyl will require a lot of trust and verification to ensure success, curbing those drug flows. I'm wondering, after today, and considering all that you've been through in the past year, would you say, Mr. President, that you trust President Xi? And secondly, if I could, on Taiwan, you and your administration officials have warned President Xi and China about interference in the upcoming elections. I'm wondering, what would the consequences be if they do, in fact, interfere in the elections?
Well, I had that discussion with him, too, made it clear I didn't expect any interference, any at all. And we had that discussion as he was leaving. Look, do I trust you? I trust but verify, as that old saying goes. That's where I am. And, we're in a competitive relationship, China and the United States. But my responsibility is to make this rational and manageable, so it doesn't result in conflict. That's what I'm all about. That's what this is about. To find a place where we can come together and where we find mutual interest but most importantly, from my perspective, that are in the interest of the American people. That's what this is about. And that's exactly what we'll do. We're in a situation where we agreed that fentanyl and its precursors will be curbed substantially, and the pill presses. That's a big movement. They're doing that, and by the way, I guess I shouldn't identify where it occurred, but John, I know 2 people near where I live. Their kids literally, as I said, strange, they woke up dead. Someone had inserted in, whether the young man did or not, inserted in a drug he was taking, fentanyl. Again, I hope you don't have any experience with knowing anyone, but this is the largest killer of people in that age category. And, I guess the other thing I think is most important is that since I spent more time with President Xi than any world leader has, just because we were vice presidents. His president was President Hu. I'm not making a joke. President Hu and President Obama thought we should get to know one another. It wasn't appropriate for the president of the United States to be dealing with the vice president. So we met, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 68 hours of just face-to-face, just us and a simultaneous interpreter. So I think I know the man. I know his modus operandi. He's been, we have disagreements. He has a different view than I have on a lot of things, but he's been straight. I don't mean that it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just been straight. And we, as I said, the thing that I find most assuring is he raised, and I fully agree, that either one of us have any concern, Mr. Ambassador, any concern about anything between our nations or happening in our region, we should pick up the phone and call one another, and we'll take the call. That's an important progress. I'm embarrassed. I think it's CBS, but I can't remember who is CBS. I'm sorry.
Mr. President, good day.
Sorry. I apologize.
You continue to stress the need to ensure competition with China does not veer into conflict or confrontation. In the past 2 years, there have been 180 incidents of Chinese aggression against U.S. aircraft in the Indo-Pacific, and of course, ramped up military activity in the South China Sea. If that does not count as veering into confrontation, then what does? And did you issue warnings against that?
Well, first of all, none of it did end up in a conflict, number one. Number two, you may recall I did a few little things like get the Quad together, allow Australia to have access to new submarines, moving in the direction of work with the Philippines. So our actions speak louder than our words. He fully understands.
And because of the news of the day, sir, I do have a question about the idea of trade on the Al-Shifa hospital. As it tries to contain and take out the Hamas that is there. This week, you also said that we must protect hospitals. So when you weigh the target against the number of civilians inside the hospital, is the operation underway justified?
Well, look, we did discuss this, by the way, but we can't let it get out of control. Here's the situation. You have a circumstance where the first war crime is being committed by Hamas by having their headquarters, their military, hidden under a hospital. And that's a fact. That's what's happened. Israel did not go in with large number of troops, did not raid, did not rush everything down. They've gone in, and they've gone in with their soldiers carrying weapons or guns. They were told, let me be precise. We've discussed the need for them to be incredibly careful. You have a circumstance where you know there is a fair number of Hamas terrorists. Hamas has already said publicly that they plan on attacking Israel again, like they did before, do everything cutting babies' heads off to burning women and children alive. And so the idea that they're going to just stop and not do anything is not realistic. This is not the carpet bombing. This is a different thing. They're going through these tunnels. They're going in the hospital. And if you notice, I was mildly preoccupied today. I apologize. I didn't see everything. But what I did see, whether I haven't had it confirmed yet, I haven't asked my team to answer the question. But what happened is they're also bringing in incubators. We're bringing in other other means to help the people in the hospital. And they've given the doctors and, I'm told, the doctors and nurses and the personnel an opportunity to get out of harm's way. So this is a different story than I believe what was occurring before with indiscriminate bombing. What do you got? Washington Post. I think that's right.
Mr. President.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I couldn't see in the light.
Mr. President, Israel's war in Gaza, more than 11,000 Palestinians just for a month, and
I'm
created.
sorry, you're breaking up. I didn't.
Israel's war in Gaza has killed more than 11,000 Palestinians just over a month and created a humanitarian disaster. Israeli officials have said this war could take months or even years. Have you communicated to Prime Minister Netanyahu any sort of deadline or time frame for how long you are willing to support Israel in this operation? Are you comfortable with the operation going on indefinitely, and is there any deal underway to free hostages? Thank you.
Yes, no, working backwards, forward. Look, I have been deeply involved in moving on the hostage negotiation. I don't want to get ahead of myself here because I don't know what's happened in the last 4 hours, but we've gotten great cooperation from the Qataris. I've spoken with them as well a number of times. I think the pause, and that the Israelis have agreed to, it's down to, well, I'm getting too much detail. I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to stop. But I am mildly hopeful. I'm mildly hopeful. With regard to when is this going to stop, I think it's going to stop when Hamas no longer maintains the capacity to murder and abuse and just do horrific things to the Israelis, and they still think that, at least as of this morning, they still thought they could. I guess the best way for me to say it is that I take a look. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, acknowledges they have an obligation to use as much caution as they can in going after their targets. It's not like they're rushing in the hospital, knocking down doors and, pulling people aside and shooting people indiscriminately. But Hamas, as I said they plan on attacking Israelis again. And this is a terrible dilemma. So what do you do? I think that Israel is also taking risks themselves about their folks being killed and one-to-one going through these hospital rooms, hospital halls. But one thing has been established is that Hamas does have headquarters, weapons, materiel below this hospital, and I suspect others. But how long it's going to last, I don't know. Look, I made it clear to the Israelis that to Bibi and to his war cabinet, that I think the only ultimate answer here is a two-state solution that's real. We got to get to the point where there is an ability to be able to even talk without worrying about whether or not we're just dealing with, they're dealing with Hamas that's going to engage in the same activities they did over the past, on the 7th. So but I can't tell, I'm not a fortune teller, I can't tell you how long it's going to last. But I can tell you I don't think it ultimately ends until there's a two-state solution. I made it clear to the Israelis I think it's a big mistake for them to think they're going to occupy Gaza and maintain Gaza. I don't think that works. And so I think you're going to see efforts to bring along, well, I shouldn't go into any more because that's been things I've been negotiating with Arab countries and others about what the next steps are. But anyway, thank you all very much. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. This ends the press conference.
when Hamas said they plan on doing the same thing again, what they did on the 7th. They're going to go in, they want to slaughter Israelis. They want to do it again. They've said it out loud. They're not kidding about it. They're not backing off. And so I just asked a rhetorical question. I wonder what we would do if that were the case.
On the hostages, though, you said we're coming for you. What do you mean to the American hostages when you said, hang tight, we're coming for you?
What I meant was I'm doing everything in my power to get you out. Coming to help you, to get you out. I don't mean sending military in to get them. Is that what you thought I might mean? No. I was not talking about the military. I was talking about you're on our mind every single day, 5-6 times a day. I'm working on how I can be helpful in getting the hostages released and have a period of time where there's a pause long enough to let that happen. And there are somewhere between 50 and 100 hostages there, we think.
And sir, one's a 3-year-old American child.
You're darn right it is. That's why I'm not going to stop till we get her. Who can hold the loudest?
Can you detail for us what kind of evidence the U.S. has seen that Hamas has a command center under Al-Shifa Hospital?
No, I can't tell you. I won't tell you.
Do you feel absolutely confident based on what you know that
Yes.
that is the truth?
Yes.
And Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that we used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours. Anyway, we may
All right, you just heard the president addressing the nation after his summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Biden made significant announcements on reestablishing military-to-military communications with Beijing, new cooperation on the flow of drugs to the United States, and on artificial intelligence. Here's part of what the president had to say. Okay, we don't have that at this moment, but for now, let's go to Jake Ward in San Francisco. Jake, give us your thoughts on the president's remarks. He led off speaking about fentanyl and of course, ended the conference or the questions, answering questions from reporters about the hostages in Israel. But what stood out to you from what he had to say?
Well, the fact that he immediately came out, Valerie, and the first thing on his mind was fentanyl, to me suggests that that is probably the most actionable, most immediate, most concrete agreement between these two nations after their multi-hour discussion here in the San Francisco Bay Area. The San Francisco Bay Area, of course, had last year more than 650 people die of fentanyl overdoses. This year we are on track for even greater deaths than that, and that's just one city across a country that is gripped by an opioid crisis in which deaths are driven by fentanyl. So the fact that the president could come out of this meeting and say that he has an agreement with the #1 provider of the precursor chemicals that make fentanyl even possible in this world suggests to me that that was a place where he and his administration feels they have landed on the most concrete possible steps. We know the Justice Department has been working for a long time to try to bring Chinese companies to heel, opening indictments against individual Chinese manufacturers. But it sounds now, both in what the president said and in some of the briefing information that we now have from the administration, that they really have an agreement in place to try to get their arms around it. So you have to assume that not just you and I, the American public, the Chinese public, but for instance, Mexican cartel leaders were listening to what was being said tonight and will be looking to try to source those precursor chemicals perhaps in a different way from China and perhaps from other countries around the world. So a big change there. And then, of course, talk turned to artificial intelligence, a very interesting topic. We didn't hear the president talk about the specifics of his agreement in this particular conversation, but we do know in our briefing from administration officials that there was a great deal of conversation, a balancing act trying to be struck in this conversation across that great table between both the desire on the part of the United States to continue to be a leader in the advancement and the creation of new artificial intelligence technologies and their incredible commercial applications, and a desire to to agree with one of the great military superpower rivals we have on planet Earth not to use that kind of artificial intelligence in order to drive and guide things like weaponized drones or civilization-ending nuclear weapons. And so the fact that those two things were the top of mind to him as he came out the door suggests to me that those are probably the ones that he had the most concrete agreements on at this hour here, Valerie.
Okay, and NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins me now. Peter, the president answered several questions about the Israel-Hamas war and hostages. There were several questions about that towards the end. What were your takeaways from the president's remarks?
Valerie, I think you're exactly right. I think that was one of the key takeaways from the president's conversation here with reporters, specifically as it relates to the situation taking place on the ground in Gaza. Even as we speak right now, the president was specifically pressed for his views, his reaction to Israel's, as it has described it, targeted raid on Al-Shifa Hospital inside Gaza. The Israelis today providing what they called evidence that there were military operations taking place inside Al-Shifa Hospital. NBC News has not been able to independently verify that, but we did see AK-47s, grenades, other weapons inside an MRI unit at the hospital there. And the president, coming into today's news conference, coming into this day, had said that the hospitals must be protected. But when pressed on this specific issue, he was not particularly critical of Israel, saying that they didn't go in there guns blazing, so to speak, that they did have their weapons, but that there was not a firefight, as the White House has been saying. There must not be in that area. And the president said very clearly that the U.S., that he has seen U.S. intelligence, that there are tunnels and military operations that take place, command and control centers underneath Al-Shifa Hospital. He says it's his suspicion that they also exist under other hospitals. At the end of this news conference, he and I had a back and forth where I asked him specifically about some of the comments he has had for the more than 230, roughly 240. I think the latest number is 239 hostages believed to be being held inside Gaza by Hamas. He had said yesterday, or I guess it was just yesterday, he said that we're coming to get you. He said, hang tight about those hostages. And I asked him what he meant by that. He said basically that he is doing everything in his power to try to bring those hostages, many of them, several of them, certainly American, home. But he said, to be clear, that the U.S. would not be sending any of its own ground forces into Gaza. About the 3-year-old American child being held there as well. He said that is among those topics that is certainly on his mind right now. But finally, when pressed whether he would provide that U.S. intelligence, whether he would declassify that U.S. intelligence, what made him so confident that those command and control centers by Hamas were beneath Al-Shifa Hospital and others, he would not go further. But I think this was a key takeaway from the president, who has been facing a lot of pressure right now with growing calls for a ceasefire. The president, his Secretary of State, Valerie, have said there will not be a ceasefire because he says, in effect, that is victory for Hamas. It will allow them to continue their pursuit, as one of their top leaders has said in recent weeks, that they want to repeat October 7th again and again and again. And the president has said, in effect, that it's up to Israel to try to root out Hamas. He doesn't want to see, as he described it, carpet bombing anywhere near or around those hospitals, but the targeted raid he appeared to be comfortable with. Valerie?
Peter, if you can, just paint a picture for us of what was going on in the room during that press conference. We know the president started to walk away from the podium a couple of times, came back to continue answering questions. What did you make of that?
Well, clearly this is a president who I think feels pretty good about the way that his visit with President Xi Jinping of China went today. He came out with a series, no major breakthroughs, but he felt like there were some deliverables, as the White House would describe them, obviously on the issue of fentanyl, the military-to-military conversations, restarting those direct talks. And he said, in effect, that he and President Xi Jinping will have agreed that they will pick up the phone and call one another in case there's ever a time where they need to speak to the other. I was struck, one of the last things he said, he was asked in regard to his comments in the past that Xi Jinping he had described as a dictator, asked if he still believes that now, and he said he is, in effect, a dictator. It's not a democracy, and there's no pushback within the Chinese Communist Party there. So it's, I think those are words that may not sit quite well with the Chinese in a visit that was so highly choreographed, an effort to reduce tensions between the two countries. Every detail here was prepared in advance. from what President Xi would see out the window of his motorcades, literally the camera angles that would be used by television crews inside their meeting today. Those final words from the president, the last ones before he departed, may not sit well with the Chinese leadership.
Okay, Peter Alexander and Jake Ward, thank you both for your expertise in reporting, and we'll be right back.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from New York.
Ground zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, the taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You are some resilient folks. Let me get in.
Israeli forces have raided the largest, most prominent hospital in the Gaza Strip. The IDF says it was a, quote, precise and targeted operation against Hamas, whom they say operates a command center from inside the Al-Shifa hospital. It is a claim that the Biden administration endorses, but it is something that Hamas and doctors at